I talk about empathy not because it's as a tactic, but it is a real emotion that you have to have when you're doing that kind of a job, or any kind of a job. When you've got bad news to impart, whatever it is, where there are victims, real people, you have to have that empathy going in as a human being, because if you don't, it's going to come off as callous.
Hey everybody, my guest today is Brad Ross, the Chief Communications Officer for the City of Toronto and formerly the Communications Lead for the Toronto Transit Commission. We hit on a whole bunch of different topics, including crisis management, the state of journalism, his beloved Toronto Maple Leafs, and his recent classic car acquisition, and a whole lot more. This is my conversation with Brad Ross. Brad Ross, thanks for being here today. And so your new role, you've been in about a year. I think it was last January you started Chief Communications Officer for the City of Toronto.
Yeah.
So I'd like to find out a little bit about that role. Like, I've been in the communications business, pretty much all my career, and it sounds like a bit of a dream job. What does a typical week look like?
So this is actually my second tour of duty at the city. So before I went up to the TTC in 2008, I was at the city as a manager of media relations and issues management. So that was from 2000 to 2008. The opportunity at the TTC popped up, and so I took it. And 3 weeks later, we went on strike, and it really never stopped for the next 10 years. Then this opportunity at the city, Chief Communications Officer, came along a little over a year ago, and went through the whole, process of, interviewing, did 3 or 4 interviews, and was offered the position. And I started in January.
So it's a new role, right? It didn't exist before.
No, I mean, there was a director of strategic communications, and so they changed the title. I mean, titles evolve, and so you see a lot of chief marketing officer positions now, and you're seeing more and more chief communications officer positions. And so I took it because the new city manager, Chris Murray, had only been there since July or August, and said, sort of carte blanche. There was a review that had begun when my predecessor announced that she was leaving, and so they paused that sort of review of the function of comms at the city. So dusted off that proposal that we were going out to market with, an RFP, a request for proposal, to have some firms come in, consultants come in, and look at the structure and the function, and integrating marketing as well as traditional communications, and how can we do that. And so that review is done, and now we're in the implementation phase, and it's going to take a good year. So there's a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting ahead in terms of positions and titles and just how we're going to function, and essentially what the new structure is going to look like. Warren, is from being a more traditional reactive sort of communication shop, which government have been in the past, particularly with with the media relations side of things. The landscape, though, the communications landscape is changing so much. People are getting their information in so many different ways. Podcasts, online, of course, and social. How can we, continue to do the media relations piece? It is critically important, especially on the accountability and transparency side of dealing with the media. But providing, information storytelling for the public on their terms, using technology that people expect. Millennials, younger people want streaming content. We need to be, engaging more with that audience, with those residents, if you will, and people who we want to engage people with the city. What is all of the services that the city provides are really, those are the ones that touch your life more than any other. 911, I mean, that's fire, police, ambulance. That's the municipal level of government. Transit, of course, parks and garbage collection and snow clearing. I mean, public health, all of those critical services, childcare, senior services, those touch your life more than any other. So how can we start to engage more with the public, tell those stories, relate more, demystify, if you will, government, it's so that they're seen as actual services and that people see the value for the money that they pay in their property taxes. So all of that is now before me in terms of creating a structure to support all of that.
You're a big fan of social media. You're pretty active on Twitter. I guess if you had to have a pie chart of all the stuff you're putting out, there's a lot of communications, a lot of City of Toronto, but probably about a third of it, maybe more, is the Leafs. How long have you been a fan?
So I was born in 1963, and the last time the Leafs won the Stanley Cup was in 67. Yeah. So I was 4, and so I have zero memory of that. As I got older as a kid in the 70s, Davey Keon and Daryl Sittler and all of those those icons. I loved the Leafs. Now, for a time as a child, I was Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito. The Boston Bruins were a winning team, and
so you jumped on that bandwagon for a
I
bit?
was a Bruins fan as a child, right. Absolutely. But as I got older, this is my hometown, and now I want them to win so desperately.
What seems to be the problem here? Like, when Babcock got hired, everybody thought this is it. Yeah. 2-3 years, we're going to see what they saw in Chicago because Chicago had bottomed out, new leadership, just blew up the team, and 2 years later they're hoisting the Stanley Cup, and everyone thought that was going to happen here. And now Babcock packs up his truck and gets kicked out of town. I watch just about every game. I'm fortunate enough to be able to go to the odd game. Family has have tickets, so I help the refs out a lot in the stands. I think they need to be a little more physical. They need to be a lot more physical. I see a lot of poke checking. I don't see a lot of body checking. Do you think they have the people to be physical, though, or do they need a couple additions?
I don't know. I mean, I think they got their first major the other night.
Of the year.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, they were the last team to actually be assessed a major. Now, I'm not an advocate for fighting in hockey, but I think there was a game last week, a few games ago anyway, where Tavares was at the side of the net and was trying to bang the puck away, and there was, the whistle went down, and there was a late hit. It was a cross-check. Nobody came to, nobody jumped in to say, hey, no, you don't do that to the captain. You don't do that to our star player.
You got to shut that down.
So
that they don't do it next time.
Right, and that's part of the game as well. It's that, I don't know if intimidation is the right word, but to demonstrate that, we're not going to take that. Right. That's, we're one team here. So I think maybe with Sheldon Keefe that they can, he's getting them to play. You're starting to see more defensive minded,
right?
And so now I think the physical part of the game needs to step up a bit. I'd love to see Austin Matthews be more physical as well. I really would.
I'd love to see him shave that mustache off. What's going on with that?
I thought it was Movember, but I guess obviously not.
I think he likes it.
Yeah, maybe he does.
So jumping back, so you're with the Chief Communications Officer for the City of Toronto, like one of the biggest cities in North America. Obviously, lots of issues. Huge mandate. How would you compare that to your role at the TTC? Because that's how everybody came to know you. Like anytime there was a fire, a delay, some sort of issue, you were there.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about the communications aspect of that as well, because I always, when you first got on my radar, I was like, holy shit, that's fast. Like, wow, he's saying all the right stuff. Yeah. And in theory, like you could go to Siri or Google and find out what to do when something goes wrong. But I find that when it happens, most organizations don't do it properly. Like it's, in theory, we all know what to do, but when it happens, we go off track. And so, pun not intended, but that, I was always impressed with the speed. Like you seemed to be there immediately and you were always saying the right thing.
It became, and I'm going to give credit to the couple of bosses that I've had at the TTC, Gary Webster and then Andy Byford after him, to allow me to do what I thought needed to be done, particularly on the customer service side of things. So yeah, it's communications, and we're getting the message out, but it was always a customer ethos, and particularly when Andy Byford came on board, that was really became his focus. And Andy, as a leader, he almost took it personally in a way that you don't let anything go unsaid and undone, and you need to respond. And that was his. He would be out there riding the system, wearing his name badge, talking to customers, answering his own emails, as much as sometimes you don't want him to do that. Yeah. And so he led by example, and so I took that and I saw the value of social media, particularly with Twitter, and the immediacy that Twitter delivers in terms of short bursts of information, addressing issues very quickly, answering questions, addressing concerns. And when you have the information, which I did, what is happening on the system, what is going on, here's what's happening. Do I have an estimated time that is going to be resolved? No, but here's what's happening. And it's, this isn't news to anybody in the comms business, but if you don't fill that void, somebody else will, and typically with misinformation. Right. And so it almost became a bit of a personal accountability, if you will, that
because your brand is part of that as well.
I sort of created a little bit of a monster in terms of
what people
responding
expected
and what the expectation was, and I did enjoy that to the degree where I was able to provide people with information. Not everybody liked getting it, but over time, and that's where I think communications folks in our business fail, is that they're too worried about the immediate reaction and response and get a bit gun shy about that, and forget that this is a long game, and that you continue to do what you do. Over time, the brand and the credibility of the brand begins to solidify, because you're being transparent, you're being honest, you're being open about what is going on the system. Honesty, openness, and transparency, or HOT, as I like to say, is critical to people's understanding of what you do, so you can demystify and explain. And so Andy Byford and I did these explainer videos where we would go out into the system and talk about a particular issue, 3 or 4 minutes, about what does the emergency alarm do, or we got this big diversion coming up for streetcar track replacement at the corner of Queen and Spadina. What does that mean to service? Well, here's what it looks like. Here's why we're doing it.
Most organizations don't do that. They don't go to that. Like, you know what? Go figure it out. Go on our website, or just figure it out on your own. Like, it takes effort to do that.
Yeah, but it's about getting in front of the issues. It's about mitigation. It's about doing things a little bit differently, and it does require some risk. We did April Fool's videos. Now, I kept Andy out of it in case they went terribly wrong.
Right, you can take the hit.
And he can, so he's not, he certainly approved of them, and it made the organization, the objective really was, whatever we did, was to make the organization relatable, make the system one that the people of Toronto actually own the system. They have a right to know what we're doing in the system and why we're doing it, and when things go wrong, here's what's happening. And so it just became part of what we did, and what I did, and what I try to continue to do. The day-to-day sort of crises, if you will, aren't as acute at the city, because it's more of a long-term thing. And now, if something, God forbid, goes wrong, and it has an impact on the city, generally, weather type events, bad weather. I'm going to be out there. We got to be out there. We got to be talking about it. We got to be acknowledging and be empathetic, and do all those things that we know as that professional communicators need to do to be successful. Remembering that, as I say, that it's a long game. And so, you put something out and people, they scoff at it, or they try to take it apart and can tell you what you're doing wrong, and that's all.
You're playing a different game, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can address those specific concerns in a moment.
You're looking at it at a macro, long-term level,
much more, yeah, and long term, because this is about the long run in terms of what it is that we want to accomplish and achieve as an organization, and so I did, and I do believe that it's critically important for organizations and for the heads of communication, somebody who's accountable ultimately, to be out there, to be talking, to explain, not defend, all of those things that good communicators should be doing, and learning every day. I mean, at the TTC, I continue to learn more. Every day there was something new to learn, and you impart some of that, you demystify it. It makes the system a little more understandable for people, and people take public transit, or they walk a certain route every day, and they've never been to this station or gone down this diversion. Where am I going? I'm gonna get lost. I'm not. So you'd always try to give people alternatives. So if line 1 is down from Bloor to Union, it is up from,
I saw one of your videos before. Someone said, "Why can't you just go around it?" You're like, "Well, we don't have tracks above or beside."
Well, see, these are the things, right? People just, they
assume you can just,
you can divert around it, and so New York City have express tracks and other systems that are much bigger than Toronto's, can do things like that. Toronto can't. I mean, Toronto, the system wasn't built that way, and that's just the reality. And so, well, you should dig another tunnel underground. So sure, I mean, it's like free transit.
Get him to do that.
What's that?
Call Elon Musk. He's into that.
Right. Yeah, we just hyperloop you all there. But it's like the argument around make transit free. It's good for the climate. It's good for people who are in poverty, and that's all very true. But it also would cost billions of dollars because never mind the subsidy that the city provides. So TTC's operating budget is about $1.8 billion. The city subsidizes about $600 million of that. If they subsidize the full shot, then what you're into is more people would start to take the system, because suddenly that 325 isn't as, people are prepared to drive, which costs more in the end than take public transit. But if it's free, they're more apt to take it, which means you're going to have a greater ridership, which then means you need more service, which means you need more buses, which means you need more operators, which means you need more maintenance facilities, which means you need more mechanics and all the support systems and
That's
fuel.
Huge
so
system,
so now you're into several $1 billion a year. So where does that money come from? Property taxes alone? No.
I saw that, I think it was about a year and a half ago, that Seth Rogen came in and did some of those public service things or whatever, the announcements for the TTC. Did you get to meet him that day? Yeah,
so what happened with that was Vancouver actually had a paid partnership with Visa, and Morgan Freeman was doing
classic voice guy.
Right, was doing these PSAs. It was actually a marketing campaign. Then Morgan Freeman got into some trouble around the Me Too movement, and so they ended up, I think they dropped him, and Seth Rogen sort of jumped in on Twitter and said, "I'll do them."
That's the next guy.
Yeah, I'll do them.
That's great.
And I'll do them for free.
No
and Norm Kelly at the time, who was a city councillor, said, "What about Toronto?" And said, "I'll do Toronto too." And it went from there. And so we wrote a bunch of humorous PSAs. The issue that we always had and continue to have, that all public transit systems have, is one around etiquette, and backpacks and feed-on seats, and sharing a close quarter public space like that.
Manspreading. It's the new one.
Manspreading. Doing push-ups and pull-ups.
People do that?
Absolutely. People do. You wouldn't believe the things that people do.
The TTC workout.
You name it. People. There have been videos of couples engaging in sex acts. I mean, the public. This isn't unique to Toronto, by the way. This is.
I think that maybe that's why Seth Rogen wanted to get involved.
Maybe, but it was fun because we got into toenail clipping and fingernail clipping and eating. And so we wrote these and he did them out of the generosity of a spirit and as a Canadian. So I went down to Los Angeles. I was just there for 2 days. Did a session in a little studio for about an hour or so, and he was terrific. And
he seems like
we had a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
What would be something that, because you worked with the TTC every day, and everyone has their own kind of version of what it is. What would be the most surprising thing that you know about it that most people don't?
Oh boy, that's it's it might be the state of good repair that is necessary, that isn't sexy. I think people sort of get it that you got to maintain the system, but think you can just do that in the couple of hours that they have overnight, between 1:30 and 5:30 in the morning. That surely all this work can get done then. That putting in a new signal system, it's just putting down some posts and then turning it on.
You're on the clock as soon as things shut down.
So as soon as the system shuts down, then the maintenance crews then need to leave their respective yards, whether it's Greenwood or Wilson Yard, for example, or Davisville. And it takes time to get to that work zone. Then you got to set up the work zone. Track level is incredibly dangerous. It's a place where there's a number of steps that must be taken. Power needs to be cut. It's called a work zone. You set up at both ends of the zone in case another work car doesn't come barreling down around the bend. I mean, it's coordinated, obviously, and so that takes time. And then you got to shut down that work zone when you're finished that work so that service can start up again around 5:30. So that window is actually quite narrow to maybe just a couple of hours a night. And that's why you see so many weekend closures now, because you need that time to, whether it's basic sort of track replacement, tunnel linings and walls and leak remediation, and then installing a brand new signaling system. You're actually installing it over top of the old, because until the new is ready to be turned on, you still need to use the old. And so you're doing this while and it's like station modifications, whether it's elevators or Union Station or anything else. You're doing this big work while also maintaining the operation at the same time. So, it's not like a kitchen renovation where you can just move out of the kitchen for a month or so, and contractor comes in and gets it done, and then you're good to go. It would be like doing your kitchen while also still needing to use the stove and the fridge, and
hosting events at your house,
doing all of those things, people coming through. And so it's not, it might not be one of those things where, wow, I didn't know that, but I think it's one of those things that the public are not as aware of, and they don't necessarily need to be. But one of the things that I think we as communicators have, one of our roles is to explain that, so that when that work is happening or before it's happening, when we announce it, that there's an explanation as to why you're doing it. It's like this year on the DVP, the city, there were 4 bridges that needed work, and we could have done them in successive summers. But instead the city said, let's get all 4 done at once. It's going to mean some lane reductions, and it's going to be incredibly disruptive for a couple of months, but we can get it done. Get that done. Yeah. And then next summer we don't need to do that kind of work again. So you try to get that out of the way, because the city and government actually desperately do try to be efficient, and are, because the public sector are criticized heavily when projects run too long or over budget. It happens in the private sector too. Of course, there's not that accountability. Sure. So maybe they're answering to their boards,
and there's not the level of transparency. Also,
there isn't. There really isn't. And I frankly think the private sector could do themselves some favor by being more transparent with the public when when they're occupying lanes of traffic, for example, and the city's working with them to try to reduce all of that. But so we are accountable to the public, frankly, because the government works for them, and I think
and they
we have
like
an obligation.
they like to complain on their phones also.
That to me, Warren, that demonstrates that they are passionate about their government and wanting to get things done right. And so, and the city is I promise people, is very much, and the TTC is very, very attuned to that and recognizes greatly the need to, not just be on time, on budget, but in fact, if you can accelerate projects to get them done sooner, and we've done that. We did that with the DVP this year, right. And not looking for pats on the back. That's not our objective. Our objective is to be on time, on budget, and for the vast majority of projects, they really are. And when they're not, we need to explain why.
So the Toronto sign, just about a block away from us, where we're recording today, has become one of the most photographed iconic landmarks in the city. My understanding is that was not meant to be permanent.
It wasn't.
And so is it going to be replaced with something?
It is. As a matter of fact, the bids have just come in, and so it will be awarded in the next couple of weeks. And it was originally designed for the Pan Am Games in 2015, and it was meant to be really up for only 6 months.
Wow.
The number, as you pointed out, the number of photographs,
ridiculous.
It's, I don't think we can count how many. On any given day, if you walk through Nathan Phillips Square, people are taking selfies left, right, and center with it. It has become iconic.
So is the new sign going to look exactly like it?
Exactly like it. The difference will
just
be
more
that
durable.
It'll be more durable. It'll be much more weather resistant. It'll have greater technology for lighting capabilities, so that we can, for special events and commemorations and other things, we can light it in
certain colors,
much more dynamic and creative way. We can do wraps. We can do all, and there'll be a maintenance contract associated with it. The Toronto sign, from a distance, you'll never notice a difference.
If you walked
up to it
today, a little bit of wear on it.
Lots of wear and
kind of like the CN Tower.
Well, I hope the CN Tower is not got a lot of wear and tear on it.
If you look at it, though, it's been there quite a while, and if you look at it, if you're ever close by, you can see where they've replaced patches of it, like all the way up, and it's a lot. Like, they've done a lot of work on that thing.
You got to maintain these things, right?
You don't want it falling down.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we just take it for granted that it's there and it's fine, but like, they've done a tremendous amount. Like, you can see huge chunks of it have been replaced and sort of solidified over the years.
So, like any piece of infrastructure, we've got the city's replacing a water main down by Jarvis and Queen now that is older than Confederation.
Really?
So these are old. There's old infrastructure. The city's actually investing in that infrastructure. It is a monumental pain in the ass for drivers.
Oh yeah,
totally get that. But
it's got to be done.
And I like to say to reporters who ask the question, rightly so, about the disruption and the diversion and construction. There's all this construction going on. The city's actually investing in infrastructure. If we didn't, then and these things started to crumble and bridges fell down and all the rest of it, then you'd be standing there asking me a whole set of very
more
different
questions.
Exactly, and rightly so.
Yeah, for sure.
So happy to answer those kinds of questions, to set that context. Recognizing reporters have questions that they need to ask, the public need to ask, and that's part of our job of explaining what it is that we do to demystify government.
Right. What is, you mentioned journalism and interviews, and I know you've done maybe hundreds of them over the course of your career. What's your quick take on the state of journalism today, particularly in Canada? I was trained as a journalist back in like 1993, 94 when I first got out of school, and I worked in journalism very briefly, and then I flipped over to corporate communications. My sister works at the Globe and Mail, but I'd be interested in your take on what's happened in journalism over the past couple of decades.
It's a really good question. I think if I had the answer, then I'd be very, very wealthy. I think I I think technology has had a huge impact on the fact that journalism for so long was basically free online.
They shot themselves in the foot with that.
You know,
Like in 1996 or 7 or whenever all these, the Globe and Mail and the TBC, they got websites and they started just putting their news on there, thinking that everyone's always going to be buying newspapers and subscribing. And it's,
there's a little bit of an add-on. Yeah.
If you look at where we are today, like when people see a paywall, they lose their mind.
Yeah. Well, this is part of the internet. This is part of what, people go to, they go to Google, and there isn't a question you can't ask online where you won't get an answer. And so the expectation, I think, that the internet,
everything's free.
Whoever the internet is, has built for the public is that it's there and it's accessible. And as soon as I got to pay for it, screw that, I'm going to go somewhere else for it then.
Well, now they're getting the news from Facebook.
Right. So, and then, and now we're into that god-awful word, fake news and everything else, right? So I think there are certainly some outlets that have really done a very, very good job of adapting. The New York Times, I think, is an excellent example of the multimedia that they are providing now. Podcasts, I'm a...
What do you listen to?
So I listen to, when I'm getting ready in the morning, I'm listening to Metro Morning.
Yeah.
And then as I'm walking to the subway, I'm listening to The Daily. I listen to Preet Bharara, especially with what's going on in Washington right now. There's a whole lot of that. I'm listening to a new podcast now called Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. I just read his book. Fascinating story about
the Weinstein.
But also about what NBC News did or didn't do.
Killed the story.
Yeah, to try. Catch and kill. That's what it's about. And so, but back to your question, I think, as I say, some outlets have done a really good job at adapting to the online world now, and this expectation that things are free and that if you really make it worth their while. So I subscribe to the New York Times, I subscribe to the Star, I subscribe to the Globe. I mean, it's kind of what I got to do.
To support the system that you're kind of
part of, and I am as much as there's that give and take with journalists and that sort of healthy tension. I always hope it's healthy that you have with journalists who have a story, who are really pressing on a particular issue. As media relations professionals in the comms world, we understand how journalists work, and I think and what their needs are, and that they have editors and producers and that they're the first draft of history and all those kinds of things. I think that where journalism could do better is understanding how government works and how the political system, not how the political system works, but how politics works and how how governments actually respond to their queries. And so when there's an FOI, what is it that government does to make sure that they're answering their questions and that they're being transparent, because we have a responsibility to be transparent. But there's a good line that I heard once that I think rings very true. What the public is interested in isn't always in the public interest, and so sometimes there are things that don't necessarily need to see the light of day, because there are other pieces at play, whether there's confidentiality agreements that you sign on to with the private sector, with a contractor, for example. There are political interests that politicians have, and this immediate expectation that everything should just be here you go, without, there's context to all of it. I'm not saying that journalists, I think they need to simply understand it. They don't have to accept it. But if there were a better working understanding of how government functions in some quarters, then I think the relationships would be healthier, and I think we would get better journalism out of it, because then you're going to get more context about exactly what is happening. So having said all that, people are, they're going online and they're looking for free information. And so what happens is they're getting
this vicious circle.
Yeah, and they're getting things without context. They're getting just clickbait. So much clickbait.
Yeah.
I saw a story last night. Somebody posted, the Edmonton Journal posted something about a petition seeking to stop LRT, and there were 71 signatures on this petition. That's not a story.
Yeah.
71, So it's clickbaity for sure. There are some outlets here in this city, blogs that do a great job at that, and it doesn't do their readers. It does them a disservice. And then finally, I think the public have an obligation as well to really be more media literate. I really do believe that they need to, be more discerning in what they're reading and ask that media literacy that I was taught that in school, and I don't know how much of it happens today, and it's just some common sense really frankly needs to be applied.
One of the things I am concerned about is because, and I think the decision to distribute free news back in the 90s results in when I got on a GO train in 1995, every single person was reading a newspaper, like a hard copy newspaper.
Yep.
And today, like zero. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago and I said, big room of people. I said, how many people have touched a physical newspaper in the last week? And out of like 100 people, 2 of them put their hand up. And so you have this model where they've given the news away for free, and now the only way they get paid is by clicks, so they migrate to clickbaity type articles. It makes me wonder what stories are not being covered, like what's happening out there that, like, I talked to my sister about it, and she says even just in healthcare, like things are on fire that are not even getting attention because there's fewer reporters. Like the Globe and Mail just got rid of 100 people of 500 people in their editorial staff. Right. And that's like the third time they've done a call like that in the last decade, because all these organizations are bleeding money. And so like I'm not sure where this ends. Like I personally think that at some point down the road it will rebound, and I think it's going to happen at the local level, like the local community. Like, I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and the newspaper there is it's like a town of about 70,000 people. The newspaper there, the quality and the thickness of it and the number of ads and the just like there's more typos and like you wonder what's not being covered that should be, and I think that's happening all across Canada.
And I agree. I mean, these free commuter papers, they're folding them. I mean,
they're gone now. Yeah,
giving it away for free.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, they really were. So, so the public they go and look for. And so going back to an earlier question and point I was making about what we're doing is providing information, not propaganda, not some government sort of news service, but rather information that the public continually ask for, and so using those channels to make sure that the public are still getting their information, recognizing as well that the media still play a very important role in government in terms of covering government and keeping government to account, but the days of the media being that conduit to the public are gone.
Because you can go direct to consumer with your phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's another role for them to play, and I think you see it in the U.S. right now that the president is being held to account by most news organizations in a very significant way. I mean, that's a heck of a story that they got going on down there.
Except for the Fox.
Well, I said most, not all.
Exactly.
Yes.
When my day job, I do media training with organizations, and one of the things that it follows from a couple of things you mentioned today, that you walk into a room of people, and I try to get the temperature in the room. Like, what do you guys think about reporters? What do you think of the media? And I find it funny that most executives and most leaders have a more than a skepticism, like almost like a paranoia of the media, like they're out to get us.
Yeah.
And I tell people, like, I really believe that except for a few outliers, like something like BuzzFeed or whatever, which I don't really consider great journalism, but I think that most journalists at the outset of a situation, like let's say something happens in the TTC and you're the guy that I have to call. At the outset, I'm not out. I don't have a story. I'm not out to get you. I'm not out to make the TTC look bad. I have a boss. I have an editor. I'm trying to find out what's going on and what do people need to know. And I need to get it quickly because I'm trying to get it faster than CTV or someone else. And so I call you up, and then we have that discussion, right? What I tell people though is you can make them be out to get you by the way you handle it. So if you don't answer your phone, right? If you let it go to voicemail, if you don't respond to their emails, and now they're at your door and they're knocking on the door. And then you give them some kind of BS answer and you try to, and so to me, I think that a lot of the skepticism about journalism is because we see organizations doing it so poorly all the time, and then they're taken into account. Like I think of the Lac-Mégantic train derailment explosion. The guy who the chair of the board who went and did those interviews, I don't know if you remember that, but it was like one of the worst series of interviews I've ever seen in my life. And I really believe, like I tell people, I show that video in all my sessions, and people like they think this guy is the worst. They think that guy's the devil. I can't believe him. And I said, like, back it up. Like, I think this is probably a good guy. Like, he's probably a guy with a good heart, and he's good at his job, and he's at the end of his career, and he's probably just I believe, give him the benefit of the doubt, because most people are good. I think he had no idea what he's getting into. Like, I thought, to me, he is from what I call the Clint Eastwood school of crisis management. You just show up and you just tell the truth, and you just try to help, right? There's no preparation. But he's speaking a different language as far as I'm concerned. And you see it with companies like, you saw it with Rob Ford, you saw it with Tiger Woods, you're seeing it with Boeing right now with this whole MAX 8 thing, which I don't know why this isn't getting more coverage. I'm interested in, where did you get your sense of communications theory? Because you seem to be one of the few that has it kind of nailed.
So my folks were in the news business, and
they really?
It wasn't. Yeah. So my father worked at the Toronto Star for years, and my stepmother worked there, and then she moved into communications, worked for Bill Davis, and so surrounded by that. And in fact, I did a stint at the Star as a copy boy when the Mississauga train derailment happened. I was 16, 17 years old.
Just an anniversary of that a couple weeks ago.
I didn't know what I was doing. I worked in, once upon a time in newsrooms, everything came across the wire on paper, and you cleared the wire, and you ran copy down to the composing room. I mean, these are the pre-computer days. So I had a sense of journalism. Studied radio and TV broadcasting at college, and felt,
So this was all baked into you very early.
Maybe in an unconscious way.
Almost genetic, maybe.
Maybe. But at the same time, I also believe strongly that, if you're honest, and as we were talking about earlier, and just tell the truth out the gate.
What a novel concept.
That. And that they're not, and to your point, they're not out, most of them aren't out to play gotcha. I think most people don't deal with the media every day. And so they're, even CEOs, they're not, they watch 60 Minutes and they see Mike Wallace and these
going for somebody's
these
throat.
Horror stories of gotcha journalism. You only need to know that much more than the person asking you the question. You're also the subject matter expert.
They need you.
Exactly. They're coming to you for information. Share everything that you can. Recognize where that white underbelly is, for sure, so that you're prepared for it. Not everybody's perfect. Not every organization is perfect. There are any number of bad news, scandal type stories lurking in every organization. I don't care how big or small or good, bad, or indifferent the organization is, but they're not there to do that. They're there, so the Lac-Mégantic, you got to go there. I mean, and the other thing, Warren, frankly, you go there with empathy. The lack of empathy, it astounds me.
First mistake.
It truly is. It astounds me how many large organizations where individuals get displaced, people lose their lives, where the automatic reaction is one of defensiveness, and I don't know if they've been talking to their lawyers, and we can have a whole other discussion about legal.
I have a theory.
What's your theory?
This isn't going to be universal, but I really believe that, I think that a lot of times the people who get put in front of the media, and like the Lac-Mégantic guy, Ed Burkhardt, I would suspect, I actually tracked him down. I found him online. I want to call him up. I haven't gotten the courage, but I want to call him up. I want to do an interview with him. Like, what were you thinking? Would you do it differently? But I really believe that he just, I think that when you get into a situation like that, I believe that fight or flight kicks in, right? And so you go from this rational being to this tunnel vision, your heart's pounding, adrenaline is going. And I think empathy is just a victim. It just gets squeezed out. And then you go into that survival mode. And it's not that you're dismissing it. I think it just gets squeezed out. So I think, that's not an excuse. Like,
No.
I think you need to train yourself to do that. Like, I think we need to empathy. Like I say, anytime anyone is injured, impacted, inconvenienced, empathy has to be number one. Like, you have to have it.
And you can apologize. And,
For sure.
There are laws that protect organizations now. You're able to apologize without it.
Because that used to be the lawyers would say, that's.
Yeah, then you're admitting liability, and therefore you're going to be sued. And I think a lot of people go in with, they're looking down the road. Their long-term vision isn't one of building credibility.
It's like,
it's
let's
one
not
of
get
avoiding
sued. Yeah.
a
Class action
lawsuit.
lawsuits.
Yeah, and so they're always thinking about what. If I say this, am I going to get tripped up? Or somebody's going to parse my words later? Is it going to become part of a claim of some? And maybe it will, but
And maybe it should.
and exactly, and if you are, and if
You've
you
done something
are
wrong,
culpable,
you need to be accountable.
Before my time at the TTC, back in 1995, there was a tragic subway collision incident near St. Clair West Station, between DuPont and St. Clair West, and a subway train.
Well, one of them
ran into
slammed
the back.
Yeah, I remember that.
And for a period of time, there were those who were saying, well, we can't say what happened. We can't lay blame anywhere because we don't know yet. And one of the lawyers, I believe at the time, said, or maybe it was a GM at the time. Anyway, he said, but it happened in our tunnel, in our subway system. Who else would be to blame? I mean, there was no explosion. I mean, I suppose there could have been, the theory may have been, well, somebody tampered with the system and this was some sort of an attempt at mass murder or something.
Right.
But, as soon as you put on that defensive shield, and
You're going down the wrong road.
you are really going down the road, and you're going to be walking into more
You're alienating
landmines.
people, right? Like, to me, people have even casual observers, when they're watching a story like that, they have this checklist of things that they expect or need you to say, even if they're not conscious of it. Empathy, apology if necessary. And then, I saw one of the interviews that you had done, I think it was with Breakfast Television when you're starting your new role last year, and you said, I just need the ability to explain to people what's happening and what we're doing about it. Or maybe that was the last job. And it sounds so basic, but like, you see so many organizations don't do it. It's just like, here's what's happening and here's what we're going to do. Like, do you ever find yourself like kind of like Simon Cowell when there's a crisis happening in the world somewhere, and you kind of sit there and just kind of judge it from your couch? Like, how are they doing?
I do all the time. I mean, and there aren't very many opportunities for me to really, jump in because, you need to be careful.
No, but
about what
you're on
you
your
say.
couch going like, oh, this
No, absolutely.
that guy's getting fired. They said the wrong thing.
You see that all the time. I mean, I'm constantly watching that and judging, well, this is how I would have done it, or this is how they should have done it. And it's easy, certainly from the couch, to say all of that. There are always going to be nuances. There are always going to be that context that you just don't have, that the public don't have. And so they don't have that. That's your opportunity to tell that story, to make sure that especially if it's a live interview, you have that opportunity now to tell those stories. And, subway suicide is a very sensitive topic, and it always had been. And
It's been covered more. Like, when I went to journalism school, there was the
Never
taboo.
covered
You don't talk about it.
And so for a period of time, the TTC's policy was, we don't talk about it. We're not, the Toronto Sun asked for numbers. And this is back in, I think, 2009, 2010, and TTC said no. And so who am I to, okay, that's, there are good reasons for it. Those are the policy decisions. It went through FOI, and ultimately the Information and Privacy Commissioner ruled that the TTC had to release those numbers. And I think that was a good decision in the end, because it allowed us to start talking about it, to talk about it more openly.
There's
working
a new
with health
campaign
professionals.
a couple months ago. I thought, like, the posters, like, if you see someone who's despondent or whatever, depressed.
Going back to 2010, we were the first system in the world to put actual posters in the system that said, if you're thinking of suicide, there is help, let's talk. And we pointed to the payphones, and every payphone in every subway platform has a blue button to crisis link. And so partnered with distress centers. And
People
Bell,
ever use that?
Oh, absolutely. People use it. I mean, some people use it, they just want to chat. Some people, but people's lives have been saved by it.
That's great.
And so talking about it was something that, when there's a problem in the system, because if somebody does attempt or does die by suicide by jumping in front of a subway train, they can now talk about it. We can say, this is actually what's happening. People think it happens once or twice a day.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard.
Oh, that would be an epidemic of unprecedented.
There is, but there's a couple of rumors out there. One is that it happens once a day. And then the other one I heard is like if you're the, what do they call it? The engineer, conductor, the driver, what's it called?
The operator.
The operator. Okay. So I mentioned 3 names and they're all wrong. So the person, the operator, that if that happens to you like 3 times, they make you drive streetcars or something.
No. So
these are all wrong.
So no, these are all wrong. It's all bullshit. But on the suicide, thankfully, it's nowhere near as frequent. I mean, on every day, that would be, more than 365 times a year. That would be out of the world. So it's about 1.5 a month on average. And TTC would say that's 1.5 too many. Yeah. There are solutions to it. Platform edge doors are one of those solutions. Literally a barrier at every platform, so you cannot get to track level. Yeah. It also, not only does it prevent suicide, it prevents track level fires, it prevents people from dropping their phones.
Or some Yahoo getting his iPhone or something,
things happen. People actually have medical episodes. They faint and they fall.
Someone passed out, and then, was it the TTC? Or was it in the UK? Someone passed out and fell onto the tracks, and a couple of guys went down. And
it happens. Absolutely, it happens. And so it prevents all of that from happening. And then, but no, 3 strikes you're out. No, I mean that because it's not your fault, obviously. So you run red signals,
and
there is
PTSD
discipline.
Sort of.
Well, then there's whole lost time injury issues with respect to
that's got to be
trauma.
Traumatic for those.
Yeah,
folks.
There's peer support groups now. The TTC has done a tremendous job in, and so when that does happen to an operator, they bring other operators in.
Right.
There's a whole campaign now that the TTC is doing since I've left, where encouraging the public. I mean, what you actually do is walk up to somebody who may look like they're in distress. Say, hey, are you okay? Everything all right? Yeah. It makes a world of difference. And so recognizing those types of behaviors. But for the longest time, we didn't talk about it. We didn't explain what was happening. They would say, power off situation.
Track level.
So now they say a personal injury at track level because you want to. So when you're broadcasting it to, 1 million people who are on the system on in the morning, not that many on the subway, but you want to be careful that you're not triggering people, that you're not causing trauma. And then when you're doing, media interviews or you're using social media and as an individual and somebody asks, another goddamn delay on the TTC, I said, unfortunately somebody lost their life this morning and we're dealing with it as quickly as possible.
Right.
And that usually,
puts
that shuts people down, but it's important, I think,
but the word choice is careful though also. Same time.
You do need to be, you don't want to, you don't want to be sensational. You want to, and again, I talk about empathy not because it's as a tactic, but it is a real emotion that you have to have when you're doing that kind of a job or any kind of a job. When you've got bad news to impart, whatever it is, where there are victims, real people, you have to have that empathy going in as a human being, because if you don't, you're going to come off as
monsters.
Callous. Yeah.
So you don't like Bruce Springsteen for some reason.
He ain't my boss. It's one of those things. I mean, maybe I'm a lone wolf in the world. I don't know. I'm not a Bruce Springsteen fan. I don't know.
So when his song comes on the radio, you flip it?
I just, I find another.
Right. Bob Dylan, how do you feel about Bob Dylan?
I can't sing.
I really don't like Bob Dylan.
I can't sing. I mean, he might be a great lyricist. I'm sure,
So going through your Instagram,
like his son better.
There's not a lot of information about you out there. You should write a memoir or something. But I did the research I could, and so I saw a couple of your T-shirts. I'm thinking, are you kind of from the headbanger type music background? Yeah.
So as I said, I was born in '63. So I grew up in Scarborough.
Yeah.
Well, I moved to Scarborough when I was 13, and that was in the, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Iron Maiden, the Scorpions, that kind of heavy metal, Van Halen,
AC/DC,
not Van Hagar,
yeah, exactly.
AC/DC, Judas Priest. That was sort of my that was the music I
still
grew
listen
up
to that?
on. In the smoking area of the high school I went to, and hanging at the mall and playing video games and going down to play pinball on Yonge Street. I do still listen to it from time to time.
too,
Absolutely. Yeah. Ozzy and all of them. Yeah.
Ozzy's got new music out apparently.
Saw Black Sabbath in you want to go see Black Sabbath in Hamilton today. It's amazing. It would be
Really?
if I could go back, I'd be maybe look at anthropology as a career and go to heavy metal concerts from bands from back in the 70s and 80s, and you see
them
guys
now.
our age who haven't changed since high school. Really, truly haven't. It's
I saw
quite
AC/DC,
fascinating.
I think it was 3 years ago at Downsview Park, and I'd never seen them before, and I was surprised at how good they were. And Angus Young I think he was 64 or 65 at the time. He's like on his side, rolling around on the stage, and like these guys are like really giving it.
I had 8th row floors for their Back in Black tour in '79.
Oh, wow.
Or 80 or whatever it was at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Yeah, jeez.
Great music venue of the day.
Yeah, for sure. So I've shown remarkable restraint not mentioning Corvettes until this point, but I have to. So I was excited. So I saw it's in your bio. It's like
I love Corvette
Leafs,
Stingrays.
dogs, Corvettes.
Yep.
So when did you? I've got one as well.
Okay.
When did you get the? Is this something? It's a recent acquisition.
It is a
last
recent.
year?
So as a kid, I loved Corvette Stingrays. So for those who aren't familiar with the Corvette models, this is the C3.
How dare they?
Yeah, well, the C3. That was the 70s sort
the
of
long hood.
Yeah, and then the 78 is the one I bought, and that was the first year of that fastback, the bubble sort of rear window. So when I left, the TTC, I rode transit for free. It was one of the perks of being an employee of the transit system. So I took transit to work every day. My wife has a car, and when I left the TTC, I said, I want a car, and it was
something practical.
It was the summer before I left. Yeah, well, yeah, the summer before I left, and I was standing at the corner. It was a hot July day, and this '74 Stingray rolls up, and the T roof's down. And they had gorgeous colors.
Oh yeah,
Chevrolet made the Stingrays had these amazing colors that you don't see anymore. And he was just sitting at the light, and I said, "Oh, that's a beautiful car. What year?" And he told me, and I started to think about it, and then how much?
And you're looking them up online.
What's those cost anyway?
Yeah.
I wonder. I think 70, 80. These are classics. There's going to be a lot
surprisingly
of money.
low,
Surprisingly affordable for me.
Yeah.
So it started to roll into my mind, and I started to plant the seed with my wife.
I was going to ask about that. How that's
so I
gotta be
started,
a
what? I
conversation.
want this kind of, so I.
What was your first reaction?
Okay, just because I have a lot of, I get into things really heavily, and then
You let them go.
I let them go because so I can't play guitar as well as I really wished I could. So fuck it, I'm gonna give it up. I'm not gonna do that anymore because takes too long. And anyway, so I probably just thought it was a bit of a fad, or I don't think she thought it was midlife crisis stuff, because I was determined not to get a red one, just so I wasn't too much of a cliche driving down the street. So I started looking for him, and then when I left the TTC, and then I really started thinking about it, because I'm
going to Auto Trader like every night?
I went to Auto Trader, went to Kijiji Auto, and that's basically where I found it. I started looking for something from that C3 era, something in the 70s. I think I 69 to 81 or something like that. And they were all, some of them were in better shape than others.
Yeah.
Looked at a couple, a lot of chip paints. The nose wasn't. Called one guy out near Cambridge and said, he had a 75 or something, and he said, "Yeah, you come on out. I'll take it. I'll take you for a drive." And I said, "Okay." And I want to take it for a spin. Well, no, it's a classic. You can't take it for a drive. I said,
I'm going to buy your car.
a car if I can't drive it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take you for the drive. You can see how it. I said, no, it's okay. And anyway,
that tells you everything you need to know, right?
Well, so I said, this guy's not, and it was a garage, sort of one of those garages that also sell cars. Yeah. And then I found this one. It's a 78, the 25th anniversary edition, that two-tone silver gray, has two T-tops, has a hard top, and then the clear.
Yeah.
So it comes with two sets of T-tops. It was an automatic, which was good because driving it in the city, and I can drive the
Stop,
stick, and I
start,
just that clutching, it would have driven me crazy, and I'm glad I did because there's a lot of construction in the city in the summertime.
As we mentioned,
Yeah, it's just, and it corners like a son of a gun. Like the handles beautifully, and I don't think a day goes by where somebody doesn't say something, about the car or ask me about the car. I love it, and I love Corvettes, and I always have, and I almost got a pace car where it says
on the side,
car, but I don't want to. But it's the next best thing. It's got the badging on it.
That's beautiful. Are you planning any modifications to it? That's the next thing. It's like kind of a disease.
Yeah. So I used to ride motorcycles, and I was constantly looking at things to, there's you can add so much stuff to a motorcycle. But I hit a fawn on a road trip that my wife and I took
on a motorcycle
as well. Yeah. So middle of the day in West Virginia. Actually, it was Virginia. We were coming through West Virginia, back into Virginia. It's like 2:30 in the afternoon, and this herd of deer ran across and thankfully I wasn't going that fast. But this fawn, they're so stupid, did one of these, back and forth, zigzagged, and then got caught under my bike went this way, I went that way. A car was coming. Thankfully, it didn't hit me, but my wife went around and because on her bike. And
you have two bikes. Okay.
So she was riding her own bike, and they were. She thought I was dead for sure. I mean, it was a bit of a nightmare. So it sucked all the fun out of motorcycle riding. Yeah. So I parked that for a while and sold the bike and decided eventually I'd get something that I would enjoy riding that was a little safer. But I haven't used to put all sorts of crap on the bike. I haven't done anything to the vat.
Is it loud? Is it like one of those rumbly?
It does rumble when you start it up and when you give it gas, but it's not, to your listeners, it's not obnoxiously loud. Okay. I'm not going to get a ticket for
call it Carrie
loud
Schmidt
pipes
or whatever from the OPP. Yeah. I got to, a couple podcasts ago, I got to interview a guy named Dave McClellan. I don't know if most people don't know the name, but he was the second chief engineer at Corvette. And so there was Zora Duntov was the first, who that's the guy who basically was the father of the Corvette, back in the 50s, and this guy succeeded him. And I had to chase him down for quite some time, but really interesting. And I got his thoughts on the new C8 and just some inside stories about working there. And I didn't know that John DeLorean worked in that, he worked in the Corvette area, and then he wanted to make a mid-engine Corvette. And they kiboshed that, and so he went, and that's what the DeLorean basically was his mid-engine version. And they kind of look sort of similar, not really, but it had that weird dashboard. It's not as good a car, but and he had other issues as well, obviously.
Well, I'll have to listen to that because I know I saw it on your podcast, so I'll have to give that a listen. But I go online and on YouTube, and there's a guy I subscribe to who rebuilds vets. He gets old vets or people buy them and they want them to. So he does this work on them, and they are kind of basic, simple. They are really sort of simple engines.
Mechanical, it's not like
it's spark plugs and carburetors and the usual. Not today where you can't
even get in there.
You need to be a computer engineer, basically.
Yeah. Who's the guy that
Ben?
Oh, Corvette Ben.
Corvette Ben.
Yeah, I
that's
follow him too.
Okay. Yeah. So he finds he's got these parts. I mean, I can
very
only imagine this
guy.
Yeah, and he wiring harnesses, and it's amazing.
He's the guy that talks about the
does.
Bubba work.
The Bubba, Bubbify, de-Bubbify this car and that, and the wiring jobs that people do.
So funny
to jury rig things, and it's amazing that the engines don't light up.
Are you? We'll have to go for a cruise next year once we get the cars back out.
We'll go for a race around the track. Yeah.
I don't know about racing, but I think my wheels would fly off. So you mentioned Metro Morning. You've been. How many times do you think you've been on there over the years?
Well, it would almost always be for almost always about some delay that was happening in the system, and just being available to explain it. Yeah, a few dozen for sure.
Wow.
We were talking about the King Street pilot, so there were other aspects of
probably one of the people who's been on there more the most, really. Who would be
I don't know.
more?
I don't know. Other than politicians, I think certainly it would almost always be an update as to if there was something happening in the system. I'd wake up in the morning. there was one interview that really does jump out at me, and one issue really, it wasn't the interview so much as in June of, I guess it was June of 18, the signal system in the yard at Wilson Yard, which is where almost all of the trains, they do store some at Davisville, would come out in the morning at start of service to build up service for Line 1. And they couldn't get any of the trains out of the yard. I mean, they had maybe 8 trains on the line when normally you'd have 40 some odd. Wow. And the message from our control center, and so one of the things about communications people is, I'm not making shit up on the fly here. I'm not, making policy. I'm the messenger, right. Truly. And I ask the questions to make, to make sure, well, what about this? What about that? To anticipate the kinds of questions I might get asked. And the message at 6:30, 6:45 was, we're not going to make service this morning. Like, this is the first time, other than, a labor disruption where, 8 trains on the line, you might as well have none.
Right.
And you're certainly not going to be able to replace it with buses because, a bus,
not enough.
A fully crowded bus, maybe you can get 60 people on that. A full train is 1,100. So do the math. There's just not the
capacity.
And there aren't buses sitting around, by the way, waiting to be pressed as emergency shuttles. They take buses off of routes. So when you hear about shuttle buses en route, they're taking those buses off of other routes to supplement the lack of subway service. Right. So people who are waiting for buses on those routes where they've been cherry-picked, they're now suffering as well. So the message was that we're not going to make service. And so for the first time ever, I had to say, Matt, I think, it was Matt that day, Matt Galloway, if you can find an alternate today, whether it's car, cycling, carpooling, whatever you can do, if you're going to rely on Line 1 today, it's going to be a while, and so you probably shouldn't. And wow, and so now a half hour, 40 minutes later, they got it back up, and really the peak of the peak is 8 o'clock, between 8 and 9 o'clock, 8:15. People do go into work. People do work 9 to 5. If you want to get a seat on the system, if you can work the shoulders of rush hour,
right,
that would be my advice. But anyway, that's where the peak of the peak is. And so by the peak of the peak, they were pretty much back up. But that was one of those messages that I've never had to deliver. And it was like, oh my goodness, that's something that I don't, I didn't relish having to share. So, there's all sorts of things happen in the system. From fires and, disruptive customers and things that happen to the system that are outside of its control, right, are sometimes the most difficult because you got to be careful how you sort of shift that blame, if you will, because we also have a responsibility to now.
You don't want to look like you're pointing fingers.
Right. But so now it becomes, then the criticism becomes, you didn't communicate it well enough. That is the one constant I think that you get is that small C communications that every organization gets when something goes wrong. Is the communication was lacking. You didn't tell us enough, or you didn't tell us at all. Of course we do. People don't necessarily hear it. The PA system might be garbled. It's not about excuses, but short of literally walking up to every single person, which is
impossible.
Obviously, being facetious, you have all these channels, whether it's the PA system in the system, whether it's phones, whether it's desktop, the media, traffic, and people do listen to the radio, and so in the morning, so the traffic reporters are critical. There's e-alert systems. There's a number of channels that you use to get the message out. You got to be consistent about it. You got to be, it's like constant. Every 10 minutes you got to be out there, repeat. And and so when it, even when somebody does something to you, now it becomes about the communication, and now it's not, shuttle buses are too full, and
Right.
you guys don't have a plan, and you don't know how to deal with crises, and so that criticism, you just got to let it roll off your
Right.
back, because it's coming from a point of frustration that I certainly understand.
And someone who's also not an expert in crisis communications.
No, or transit.
Right.
There's a lot of, and I'm
Armchair
a lot of
TTC experts.
out there in air quotes who think they this is how you should do it. And believe me, if there was a new way of doing it, we would be doing it by now.
Just before we wrap up, I want to be respectful of your time. What would be some advice you would give to, I know there are a lot of communications folks who listen to this. What would be your advice to help them become better communicators for their organizations? Whether it's proactive, reactive, positive, negative, so many organizations don't communicate well. What would be your biggest piece of advice?
And I think the reason they don't communicate well is that they're afraid to communicate well. They are risk averse, and so it would be seen as risky to be frank, to be as honest and open as you really do need to be as your public, whether it's the general public, and if your government or your customers or your shareholders or your stakeholders or whomever it is, your community. The fear of authenticity, because now you're sort of exposing yourself a little bit, and acknowledging a bit of a failure, if you will, a bit of a that we're not perfect. I think that's where that comes from. I haven't, I think about that. I think about this question sometimes, and I think about what is the answer to that. What is the panacea to doing for organizations to do better? And I don't know if I've nailed it or not, but I think it is, frankly, the fear, and you hear this sometimes, a fear of success, and I've never really understood, but I think that might be because to get to that point, there's going to be some missteps. You're gonna stumble a bit, and you're going to take those early hits because, wow, you really screwed that up, and why didn't you do this? And so you acknowledge, and it's that long game that we talked about much earlier.
Right.
And if you got your eye on that, I believe that it goes a long way to your credibility, whether you're the spokesperson or to the organization that you hear this word authentic all the time.
Right.
And what does that mean? But if you can be, if you can be real in terms of showing that you're not perfect, that there are some flaws in the system, and that we might need to do better here. We might, the advice that I'm sure you give to those who are doing crisis comms or media relations is acknowledge the problem, and then try to identify what the solution may be going down the road. You may not have the solution yet because it's still fresh, but if you acknowledge that we need to do better at something,
Right.
As long as it doesn't become a fallback, and you're constantly looking for the solution, people will start to see that you're improving this or you're improving that because you've done this, and they see that. Most people are very, very reasonable, except when they're behind a keyboard. and
anonymous.
And anonymous. And so these are things people will say things to you online that they would never say to your face in a million years, because in their heart of hearts, they're actually nice people, but it's an ability to vent a bit and be frustrated, and maybe there's some trolling involved. Recognizing that and not taking it personally. So my advice to anybody, in communications, whether you've been in it for a long time or you're just coming into it as a new career, is to think like the person whom your message is ultimately for, and to have in your mind's eye, who is it that's listening to you or reading what it is you're saying? And a long time ago, when the Earth was flat, I used to write brochures. When brochures were a thing, and and I worked for the what's now called the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. It used to be the Workers' Compensation Board, and be writing these brochures about how do you appeal a decision of for injured workers. And so I always had in my mind's eye an older person sitting at home reading this, because they're claim has just been denied, and they're
I'm gonna walk them
they're
through it.
anxious. What do I? So plain language and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But if you have that audience in mind,
A lot of people don't do that though. They just like the brochure is the audience, like it. Yeah. And so like I'll sometimes ask people in, it doesn't matter what the sector is, but like we'll have these crisis scenarios and people have been hurt and injured, and I'll ask them to put messages together, and I say, okay, read them out for us, and they sound very like the way that we think messages should sound. Like the language is too big and the words are too long, and it sounds like an ass-covery language, and it sounds very arm's length. And then I say, how would you say that to your brother or your sister? How would you say that to your friend? And they look at me kind of weird. I say, like, how would you say it to a 12-year-old or your grandparent? And then when they say the same thing that way, it just rings, right? It's like that's how people want to hear it.
That's great advice. You're telling your 9-year-old nephew for the first time. How do you explain it? And it really is about explaining, not defending. And it is so true, because people go into these interviews, and we talked about earlier, with a defensive mode, that they're going to, someone's going to play gotcha, they're going to get caught out. And you explain, and it's okay to say I don't know, and to acknowledge that there are unknowns, whatever the situation may be, and that one of the objectives is to get to those unknowns. It's and not to take it personally, as tough as that can be sometimes, especially online when you are the spokesperson for whatever. You will get messages that you'd rather not read and hear and
That's a nice way to put it.
And there are people out there who truly are not nice people. That's just a fact of life. I think we all know that in our heart of hearts. And
but you can't base your behavior on that.
You can't. If you did, you'd never do any. You'd never leave the house, frankly. So
and journalists get it pretty bad too. Like my sister, Carly, she's been writing the vaccination issues and the vaping things, and it's the people who get so enraged and attacking her like she's just like, I'm reporting a story.
And female journalists especially, like Carly it becomes really disgusting. It does. And I've had messages directed at me personally and my family that are really quite, over what amounts to a delay on a transit system. As frustrating as it can be, it becomes, it does become a bit troubling. And, and look, I think to the world out there, and if that starts to happen, don't be afraid to call the police either, because
that's true,
because frankly, no job is worth that bullshit.
Yeah, and the mute button, it helps. It's one of the things I've discovered this year. It's like magic.
Mute,
just mute. You don't block them. No, just mute them. I don't give them the. But just it's the life's too short. Mute.
Another trick of the trade is if they're following you, block them and then unblock them.
Okay.
So you're not blocking anybody, but it unfollows you. They unfollow you then suddenly. So they're not seeing your feed. They have to go back and follow you.
Nice.
If what you're writing is a
Twitter
constant
hack.
trigger for
That's
you.
good. So, Brad Ross, thank you very much for being here. Where can people follow you online? What's your Twitter handle?
So I'm at Brad Ross TO. That's my Twitter handle, and you'll see some tweets about the Leafs, which somebody actually complained to me about a few weeks ago, and I said, well, then maybe you want to unfollow me, because I am going to tweet about the Leafs from time to time. The next day they said, you know what, I went too far there, so sorry about that. It's all good. So Brad Ross TO on Twitter, and shoot me a question. There's so much that happens in the city that I would love to. I'm thinking about how I might use my City of Toronto account now to sort of demystify what happens at the city.
Excellent. Any plans for a Instagram account for your car? That's the new thing.
My Instagram, it's really personal. So I tweet.
We need more Corvette.
My dog, Corvette. My dogs as well. I got 2 young dogs.
Pomeranian.
I got a Pomeranian. And I got a Scottish Deerhound. Yeah. She's as tall as this table now. She's only 9 months old, so she's getting bigger. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here.
It was my pleasure. A lot of fun. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brad Ross. Very interesting guy, and I hope to have him back again for a follow-up conversation later this year. If you haven't taken a chance to do so, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a comment or a rating for the show. It'll help other people find the show. Anyway, thank you very, very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.